Thank you very much, Alex. Well, in my excitement to invite him on stage and listen to him, I forgot to introduce Alex. So we'll do it like a music band, you know, first the gig, then the introduction. So Alex John London is the KNL Gates Professor of Ethics and Computational Technologies and co-lead of the KNL Gates Initiative in Ethics and Computational Technologies. Is the director of the Center for Ethics and Policy and chief ethicist at the Block Center for Technology and Society at Carnegie Mellon University. As a member of the World Health Organization's expert group on ethics and governance of AI. A member of the U.S. National Science Advisory Board for Biosecurity and a Hastings Center Fellow. So thank you again, Alex. Well, one more time, let's give it up for Alex. And so for our second session, we are going to have first a speech by Christof Koch, and then we are going to have a conversation between Christof Koch and our colleague here, Erik Severson. So I am going to introduce them first and then I'll leave the stage to them. Erik Severson is a philosopher specializing in the work of Emmanuel Levinas. He's the author of Before Ethics, Levinas's Philosophy of Time and Scandalous Obligation, and editor of 8 other books. Severson strives to practice inclusive pedagogy while teaching philosophy at Seattle U, often focusing on racial justice, environmental ethics, and the philosophy of technology. And now I would like to introduce our speaker. Christof Koch is the meritorious investigator and past president at the Allen Institute for Brain Science. He's the author of, well, most recently of Then I Am Myself, the Word, a book on consciousness, and is chief scientist at the Tiny Blue Dot Foundation. So, Christof.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak here. And I feel I owe it to my Jesuit teachers. I went to a number of Jesuit schools and high schools way back. Yeah, I'm from the Allen Institute just down the road here, and I'm going to talk to you about a slightly different topic. I'm going to talk to you about consciousness. I define consciousness simply as having any experience. There are different words that people use: awareness, phenomenology, subjectivity, mind. It all amounts to the same thing. Any experience. It feels like something to be in love. It feels like something to be angry, to be bored, to be dreading, fearing, dreaming, imagining, hearing, seeing, wanting, all of those states. All right, is this my slide? Yes. So one problem is, particularly if you're like me, you're a scientist, and we try to study things using what's called third-person perspective. So what's unique about consciousness and makes it different from any other object of scientific investigation like black holes or viruses or neurons in my case, is that all those 3 things have third-person aspect. You can study black hole using instruments, you can study brains and viruses using instruments, so you can measure their, you can measure their constitution, what they're made out of, the forces act on them, etc. Consciousness is very different. It's central to our lives, but it has this private, first-person aspect. Only I know about my particular consciousness. And the way you find out about other consciousness, you talk to people. If it's people, if it's a baby or a patient, you know, that's aphasic, it's a bit more difficult. And of course, it's more difficult in animals that don't talk. So typically in us, it's associated with behavior. This turns out to be critical when you're trying to judge whether people in the clinic are conscious, because the way you typically do it at the bedside, neurointensivist or nurse, you ask the patient, can you move your eyes, can you hear me, can you move your head, etc. Yet there are many states, of course, that we undergo. All of us will go tonight, will fall asleep, and inside our sleeping bodies will wake up, and we have other types of experiences. They're slightly different from waking consciousness, but it's a conscious state nonetheless. We dream. Many of us meditate. You sit on your cushion, you know, for an hour or longer without trying to move. You're highly conscious. Or for those of who've experienced altered states of consciousness, whether that be near-death experience, mystical experience, religious conversion experience, or psychedelic experiences, particularly if you take a high dose of things like 5-MeO, DMT, the toad, you can go into complete altered state where you're sitting immobile with eyes wide open, or you may lie on the ground totally unresponsive to the world, yet you're transported beyond space-time. You can experience heaven or hell and anything in between. Furthermore, the other difficulty, there's this double dissociation between behavior and consciousness. In other words, there are many conscious states that don't have behavior, and there are many behaviors that are not associated with consciousness. So typically, very fast behaviors, stereotype behaviors like eye movements, like if you do posture judgment, typically don't involve consciousness. There's a large academic literature on it. And of course, Nietzsche and Sigmund Freud, and ever since then, we study unconscious behaviors that can have, including things like that were already mentioned, racism and sexism, that people are totally unaware of, yet it profoundly influences their behavior and how they act vis-a-vis the world and others. So the fact of the matter is, particularly if you're dealing with consciousness in non-adults, in non-neurotypical adults, like in the clinic, in the ICU, or with babies, or with preterm infants, like a 24th week preterm. Is that preterm that isn't fully developed yet? Are they conscious? What about animals? And then what about cerebral organoids or LLMs? So in general, we have to realize that determining consciousness is always a probabilistic inference to the best explanation. So in fact, ontological solipsism, so typically in your first year undergrad school, when you do a philosophy of mind, someone will always ask, well, but I could be the only conscious creature and you guys are all zombie. Yes, logically, that's certainly compatible with everything we know, but it's extremely unlikely on all sorts of grounds. Of course, the other challenge is if you study consciousness, and we know this because of the polarized world we live in, but we also know this through hundreds of illusions of phenomena like this. How many of you see this as white and gold? Come on, raise your hands. How many see this dress as white and gold? And how many see it as blue? You guys are so deluded. This dress is obviously, I've never seen this, so I show this at many lectures. I've never seen it as anything but white and gold. So what's remarkable here, this is sort of a fun, illusion. What's remarkable here that unlike many other bistable illusions that you can see either one way or the other way, this most people only see in one way. And typically it's like 30% of people are like me, they see it in white and gold, and 60% can only see it in black and blue, and some can actually alternate. And I think this is typical. This is just a sort of a fun illustration of something. We all live in our own perception box. We all live in one particular reality that depends on our brain, our upbringing, and our conscious or unconscious biases. I mean, this is, of course, a very old insight. You can go back to Immanuel Kant, who even argued that space and time are constructs of our mind, and that there is no absolute space and time out there, a conclusion that many foundational physicists also come to. So it's all a construct. Now, of course, we happen to share to share sort of many aspects of reality we share. That's why most of us don't walk in front of a truck, because that's shared reality. But there are many things like this, or if you think about the political domain, whether, things like October 7th or January 6th, etc., they are viewed profoundly different. People can look at the same facts, but can give profoundly different interpretation of those. But that's just the aspect of, this is our reality, and our reality is constructed by our brains. Since we all have slightly different brains, we all construct different realities. And furthermore, so this just emphasizes, I like to show this is really a fun illusion. So it's the only illusion I'm going to show. It's just partly for fun. So just fixate at the cross at the center. And I don't know, it's very bright here, so whether it'll work, but what you should see, that everything will, if you just keep on looking at the central cross, you should see a single green disk. Is that what some of you see? Yes. So if you think about it, this is remarkable. What's actually out there are 11 pink disks and a hole, and the hole travels. What you see, what your mind sort of constructs out of that, in a very lawful way, we understand why this happens, is a single green disk. So again, this speaks against sort of naive naive realism that, well, of course, there's this one-to-one mapping. There's a world outside there, and we, it gets mapped onto our perceptual surfaces inside our skull. No, it's an active construction that each of our brain does. And this is the way we experience the world. So if you have, for example, if you're colorblind, or if you have, if you grew up in a different environment, you might see this differently. And of course, animals can see things very differently. It doesn't mean they don't see that, we each have our own reality. This is also known as the Umwelt. All right, so I study brains. This is a human brain. It's 1,000 times smaller mouse brain. It's remarkably similar. Something people rarely acknowledge is if I give you a little quinoa-sized piece of brain, and I remove the scale bar, it is only an expert armed with a microscope can say with any certainty this is a mouse, or this is a human, or this is a monkey or dog. The basic stuff of life is all the same. And we don't even have the biggest. The biggest brain is, is elephants and blue whale. Although sort of we have these scales and we can adjust them properly to make sure that the human brain comes on top if you normalize it by all sorts of things. We game it because of our inherent belief in human exceptionalism. But we're not exceptional. We are part of nature. We're as exceptional as any other species. We're no more exceptional. We just happen to be the dominant species on the planet. All right, so then there's a sort of, I worked with Francis Crick many, many years ago and set this in motion, this modern program for what's now called studying the neural correlates of consciousness. For any one conscious perception, such as, seeing a German shepherd, there are going to be some mechanisms in the brain that correlate with that. And in fact, it's not only correlation, it's causal. If I perturb this mechanism using electrodes or psychedelics or brain-machine interfaces or whatever technology I have, I can modulate what you actually see. So this is now a big thing in science, and hundreds of labs are questing sort of for which bits and pieces, because we know it's not the entire brain, it's only bits and pieces of the brain that sort of directly underpin, provide the physical correlate of consciousness in us and in closely related species. Like the dominant species that are being studied in this context are the non-human primates and then rodents, mice and rats. So when it comes to thinking about consciousness, there's sort of two very broad camps. The biggest camp sort of is based on what's called functionalism. It's also called computational functionalism, this particular variant, introduced by the American philosopher Putnam, or Turing functionalism. It asserts that consciousness has a function like anything else. It has a function, and once you've replicated this function, if you properly understand what the function is, and you replicate this function, let's say on a computer, on an LLM or something like that, then this entity will also be conscious. So it's all about the function that consciousness performs for you, and then its causal relation to all sorts of other things like attention, like memory, etc., etc. Dan Dennett is probably, the best-known American philosopher, recently passed away, who argued for a version of functionalism. It is the dominant philosophy in analytical philosophy department and in big tech. So all of these theories, the most popular probably being global neural workspace, these are just very scientific theories of consciousness that are popular and they're being studied in labs today or computer science schools today. They're all sort of various instances of computational functionalism. It also argues these are profound physicalist theorems. So they argue ultimately the only thing that exists is this. Physical stuff, matter, energy, space, time. There's nothing else. So consciousness does not occupy any special ontological status. In the final analysis, we're confused about consciousness. Consciousness by itself isn't anything special. It's just an outcome of a vastly complex machinery. Right? So ultimately, we're just reduced to mechanisms. We're no better, we're no worse than any other mechanism. We're basically machines, meat machines. And consciousness will be explained just like any other function has been explained in biology. The challenge is, of course, to understand why, and this is sort of the argument of another philosopher, a very famous philosopher, an Australian-American philosopher, David Chalmers, he of the heart problem. The challenge here is to explain why should any function go hand in hand with conscious experience. I mean, does my garbage compactor, right, clearly is a thing, it's a mechanism, it has a function to compact my garbage. Does it have feelings? Because it does this function. Very difficult to understand why that should be so. Anyhow, so people are now very explicit. Until recently, this wasn't sort of realized, but people are now very explicit about the metaphysical assumption of physicalism, which is just sort of an updated version of materialism, of good old materialism. It's really Cartesian dualism, but shorn of all of its cognitive stuff. René Descartes famously divided the world into two dominions. There's a physical stuff, res extans, things that have extension, and there's cognitive stuff that only humans have. And essentially, the sort of physicalism is really leftover dualism when you remove all the one side, all the cognitive stuff, the soul stuff, the so-called spooky stuff. All right, and so the argument is LLMs, are they conscious, or is it just a question of, well, we need this more function, or we need a little bit here more, but if not today, then the next iteration, ChatGPT 5.0, will be conscious. Which, of course, is this huge deal because of its ethical implication. Now, the theory that I've worked on, which is sort of among the two most popular theories in this space, integrated information theory, takes a radical different approach. It's much more closer to let's say, Leibniz, at the beginning of Enlightenment. It's really due to the Italian-American psychiatrist and neuroscientist Giulio Tononi. I'm just going to give you the bottom line, because typically I teach workshops on this. It's a very sophisticated theory that makes very explicit assumption about what exists and what doesn't exist, and how to compute what any particular system is conscious of. But finally it says any system, so any mechanism, it's agnostic to whether it's brain or computers or any other physical system. It avers that any system is conscious to the extent that it's complex, and it's irreducible in a very particular mathematical way defined by, for the experts, transition probability matrix. You look at any mechanism like a neural network or brain or a computer, and you look at its entire state and the transition from one state to the other. If you do that exhaustively, you get something called the transition probability matrix. From that, you can sort of unfold all the causal relationship of this system with each other, and you can exactly say, if the system is irreducible, in other words, if the system cannot be reduced to its individual parts without losing something essential to that system, to what defines that system, then it will feel like something. It will be conscious. How conscious it is given by this number you may have heard. It's a Greek number phi, the integrated information that can go from 0 when the system doesn't exist for itself. It's fully reducible to a simpler system, to enormously large numbers of phi for very complex systems like the human brain. And it'll also describe the quality, because that's the other challenge. We not only have to explain in science why anything feels like something, but also why does pain feel so different from boredom, which feels so different from being, having a mystical experience or eating a slice of leftover cold pizza. These are all distinct conscious experiences. They all feel very different. So any theory of consciousness worth its salt has to finally explain that. All right, by the way, here information is used not in the Shannon sense, the Shannon sense which we all know of in computer science, where you take information, you send it from A to B through a noisy channel, and you can compute in bits and all of that. This is in the much older notion of Aristoteles, informare, to give form to. All right, now this has all sorts of ethical implication, which is what we want to speak about here. So one, there are lots and lots and lots of patients that are either in a coma or in what used to be called vegetative state, what's now called behavioral unresponsive state, where the patient, let's say, had a cardiac arrest or hemorrhage or opioid overdose or massive TBI, and it's now in the ICU, it's being vented on a ventilator support. Sometimes they may have their eyes open, sometimes their eyes closed, but no response. Or, you ask them, sir, can you hear me? Can you move your eyes, etc.? No response. And it's 1 million worthwhile each year, so it's a large number. It turns out, we now know, this is a discovery over the last 15 years, that roughly one out of 5 of these patients is actually conscious. They're conscious, but they're unable to respond because either they can't hear you, or they can't move because whatever, the stroke or the TBI has damaged their motor cortex, or they don't have the cognitive capacity to respond because they're just too confused given what and whatever happened to have. And the shocking fact is in the US, roughly 75% to 80% of these patients, they're called DOC, disorders of consciousness patients, they die from withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment. So typically after 4 to 5 to 6 days, the medical team will initiate this discussion with the family and advocates for the patient and will ask, well, sir, is your mom, did she leave any instruction? Is this really how she wanted to live her life? And then in 80%, 4 to 5 of these cases, the ventilator is pulled and the patient dies. Although we now know, at least in smaller trials, that a significant number of these patients is conscious. It's among the most wrenching decisions anyone has to make, of course. And there are lots of ethical issues involved in providing this additional information. So if we had, for a true theory of consciousness, we should be able to build a conscious detector. So I can say this patient is conscious and that patient is not conscious. And there are all sorts of ethical implications with that decision making. Both, some are very good, some are more troubling that one has to carefully think about once we have such detectors, and people are trying to build these detectors now. So essentially a biomarker for consciousness, not for behavior, in the absence of the patient being able to respond. All right. Why am I think I'm in a loop. There. So sometimes it goes back. The theory makes some very clear prediction, although it's agnostic to the underlying hardware. It really says, does a system exist? Does it have causal power upon itself? And it really, for computers, you can have a computer that can simulate a human brain. People haven't done this yet, but it's a practical methodological problem. It's not a conceptual problem. Soon we will have computers that will be able to simulate all the hardware in a human brain. And then, of course, if you're now a functionalist, you would say, well, of course, this machine is conscious. How could it not be? There isn't anything else. But if you argue like IIT does, it's really about causal effect power, then you have to look at the hardware where the rubber meets the road, which is at the level of the CPU. You actually have to look at the level where in charge packets are shunted from one gate on one transistor to the next 3 transistors. And there the hardware is radically different from the hardware that we have in our head. And therefore we can pretty confidently conclude that machines, von Neumann machines as currently construed, will not be conscious. No matter how, so you really have to think about intelligent conscience are 2 very different things. Consciousness is about being, it's a state of being angry, being in love, seeing, hearing, etc. Intelligence ultimately about action in the world at a short or at a longer time scale. And doing is fundamentally different from being. What machines are getting better and better at, and in the limit better than us, of course, is doing stuff, including decision-making, as we heard from the previous speaker. Consciousness is associated with doing, of course, because, it had to be because we evolved creatures, but fundamentally it's about being. So one way to think about it is when you think, so I have a friend, I used to be a professor at Caltech for a quarter of a century, and I had a whole bunch of friends who simulated the central mass at our galaxy, at the center of our galaxy. It's a 3 million solar mass. And you can write down the 10 equation, Einstein fields equation of general relativity, and you can simulate the fact that the central mass at the heart of our galaxy is a black hole. So it's so powerful, it bends space-time around it, so nothing, not even light, can escape. That's its name, black hole. But funny enough, no one is concerned that turning on this computer simulation will suddenly suck the computer programmer into the computer. In fact, it seems stupid. Well, of course not. It's just a simulation. Well, the same thing is also true with consciousness. Yes, you can simulate consciousness, whether that's on an LLM or on a more future machine that actually simulates the human brain, but it doesn't have the causal power of the human brain. Just like a simulation of the galaxy does not have the causal power to bend space-time around it. All right. Now it's different. I work with Google Quantum AI there, with some people there, and it's different with quantum computers because of if you can entangle large number of bits, you get very high connectivity, much closer to the connectivity in the human brain. So in the future, it may be possible that computers construed using different hardware may well feel like something. All right. No, the theory also predicts that all mammals, not just Homo sapiens, feels like something and can suffer. Of course, this is an old intuition. If you read, for example, you grew up like me on St. Francis, right? All creatures are brothers and sisters, not just us and maybe dogs and cats and orcas and some other charismatic megafauna. As far as we can tell, particularly given the vast complexity of even quote simple brains like the brain of a bee that has 1 million neurons, but 10 times, its circuitry is 10 times denser than the human brain. It can do complicated things like the waggle dance. It can recognize individual, bee owners, etc. All the evidence it uses some of the same hormones that we use. All the evidence suggests that it too feels like something. It too lives a short life bookended between two eternities, just like you and I. And that has, of course, massive ethical implications. In fact, consciousness may extend, this is one consequence of IoT, may extend throughout the animal kingdom, and not only associated with sort of mammals that we have most sympathy with. Yeah, so this has, of course, major ethical implication for the absolutely horrendous industrial livestock production and factory farming. Yeah, and I just wrote this up in a book that just came out last month. Thank you very much.
Sometimes when I'm wanting to listen to an audiobook or a podcast, I'll go to speed up the speech rate of the podcast or the audiobook, and my thumb slips and I hit 2.0 or 3.0. I kind of feel like that's happened this morning as two presentations have reviewed an intense wealth of ways of thinking about issues and problems, especially as innovation meets humanity. So thank you both very much. These were incredible career-worthy material condensed down into just a few minutes, and we deeply benefit from your generosity, and welcome all of you here to Seattle University. It's a delight to have you here. My job is to have a short conversation to slow down the pace just a little bit as we think about where innovation meets humanity, and some of what the scholars that are here today will continue to speak about, a cusp or a breaking point where sometimes the momentum of technology and its innovations, including artificial intelligence, can run up against the cusp of our humanity and begin to have cost and cause problems. It's not to say that we should cease our innovation to attend to what happens as it meets our humanity. Christof, I want to thank you for a career full of protecting a kind of hard line between where the momentum of technology might bring us to think about the human person and especially the phenomenon of human experience. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions as we think about healthcare alongside AI and the momentum of technological tools, because we're thinking about AI and healthcare all day today. But in particular, I think what you've protected is the uniqueness of human experience that folks who are pressing the pedal down on innovation, full speed ahead no matter what, are quick to override assessments of human experience that are everyday, that are the way that we understand the world and experience it, the way we feel pain. In some of your writings, you've articulated beautifully the uniqueness of human experience of pain. When we think about healthcare, what could be more important than the treatment of, assessment of, the way that we encounter pain as healthcare givers or as patients who are receiving healthcare, or the way that we see our loved ones experiencing and going through pain and yearn for them to have healthcare that fits their unique consciousness of that experience. So I'm wondering, as you've protected this, I think of it kind of as a firewall as I read your work and as I listen to you talk, a cautionary warning that what we mean by human consciousness should not be easily overwhelmed or overwritten or codified. Sometimes you say computed. And in these ways, if we're quick to assume that we understand human consciousness in a computational way, then we are losing an enormous piece of what it means to be creaturely, to be mammalian or to be human. And I wonder if you could speak to the way that healthcare might be precariously headed towards problems the more that we give into this, the functionalized understanding, of what I think of as a kind of reductionist understanding of human consciousness that's really bent to fit our tools, not to fit the people and their unique experience of the world that they have. Could you speak a little to the relationship between everyday healthcare experiences and the problems that you're exposing with an overly reductive understanding of human consciousness?
Yeah, it's the identification, the growing identification of the human with just his or her functional aspects, doing. And if this doing, if the person can't do anymore, like I had a shocking discussion a couple of days ago where someone said, well, if they can't do anything anymore because, they're one of these patients, then, what's the point? So that's very dangerous because soon machines will be able to, not now, but soon, soon, let's say 10, 20, 30, 40 years, certainly within the lifetime of the younger members in the audience, will be able to do anything we can do, but better, faster, cheaper, outsourced to some cloud, right? And so where does that leave human value? Not only practical sense, human labor, but where does it leave human value if we define ourselves purely by function? So I think, if we think consciousness is just yet one more function, just like, the labor I provide, the human provides consciousness, and this is all computation. This can all be computed. I think that's wrong. Consciousness cannot be computed, can be simulated, of course, so you can pretend that the system is conscious, but I think it's very dangerous. It's just the ongoing, continuous dehumanization, in this case, in the context of healthcare.
Oh, great.
Oh, sorry. I am sorry. Yes.
Thank you for that answer. I'm also thinking about the mentality of a healthcare giver. We have a robust nursing school at Seattle University, and I really appreciate having nursing students in my philosophy classes as we're thinking about the types of technology that nurses and physicians and diagnostic techs take up to provide, to optimize healthcare and to be most aware of what's really happening with the patient. So one of my concerns is, how do tools, for instance, tools that are built with a functional understanding of human consciousness or positivistic understanding of the data that is fed into a healthcare decision-making algorithm, if we're trained on these tools and then we turn and look at people's faces, having fixated primarily on diagnostics tools that are built in this way that you're critiquing, I'm wondering if our nursing students and physicians ought to be hyper aware of a problem that seems to be baked into the technological side of our healthcare. And maybe this helps explain some of the inequalities that Alex was pointing out before, that it's running much deeper than merely a tool seeking to be non-biased.
Well, I mean, we are stuck now with AI, right? Otherwise, we have to disinvent the last 300 years of sort of progress, right? We're not going to get rid of it. But we have, like any other tool, we have to learn how to use it. We have to be very careful of this issue we just spoke about, this dehumanizing aspect. So yeah, of course, we want to use it in the healthcare context, because on the one hand, like any tool, it empowers us. It can make things really very powerful. If you think about scaling up, if you think about anyone on the planet face having an actual therapist in their pocket that they can consult at any point in time. Once it's validated, that's awesome. That's fantastic power. We just have to do like any other tool, like social media, and like the printing press 300 years ago, when people were concerned about the effect of the printing press on the young mind, right? Or books, widespread availability of cheap books. It's yet another turn on that technological screw, and we have to learn to live with it. So we have to realize that these are machines, and they're different. They share some similarities. In some sense, they are more powerful than us. They may become ever more powerful than us, but we have something that they don't have. We have, these states of being. We have, we feel like something. So far, at least, there's no evidence whatsoever that any machine feels like anything, whether that's my Tesla or my garbage compactor. They all feel like nothing.
Ah, very good. I know you don't own a Tesla.
No.
Because you just ride a bike around.
Yes.
So
metaphorically
you
speaking.
may well have that.
Metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so beautiful. I think we're getting somewhere, and it's really helpful for what we're up to in this innovation meets humanity. So my wife's a nurse, and I'm thinking about all these times she's plugged the O2 sensor onto a patient's finger in 20-some years of nursing. And these studies, these are very recent. In fact, I'd only barely heard of it until you exposed it more today. What a powerful, disturbing, fraught enterprise. I mean, I had one on my finger the other day when I went for a breathing treatment for asthma. I had no idea my white skin was registering on this monitor in a particularly acute way that might be overlooked if black skin had been placed in this little, little teeny thing you put your finger in. Okay, so this thing that machines can't have, don't have, however we might express it, is something I would like to our nursing students, my spouse, my students who are training to be nurses, to be aware of this layer of where innovation meets humanity. There's no way you could train a nursing student to know all of the places systemic racism or sexism exist within a systemic problem within healthcare, right? But we might be able to prepare technologies and practitioners of healthcare in such a way that they're vigilant for the appearance of these things, that they expect them to be there, right? I find in your expansive understanding of consciousness room for us to acknowledge and to explore what it might mean to be vigilant for all those places where innovation meets humanity and innovation overlooks humanity.
Yes, certainly. If you think about another context that I've been sort of not peripherally aware of is dating apps, right? So you now have these apps, and particularly these avatars, where people particularly older males, fall in love with their avatars, and you can have arguments with them how they get them. They understand their jokes. Right now, so what does this tell us about the human, apart from what that tells us about the human condition, they now believe they're these entities, they're particular avatars that understands them more than another human. So on the one hand, it's like anything else, it's great, but it's also horrible. It's great because if these people were truly lonely before, at least now they have someone they can speak to, but it's also horrible if this prevents them from meeting actually humans, real humans at a coffee shop or in a bar or wherever, because they, back home on their computer, they have this person, supposedly this person that gets them much better. I mean, what sort of future are we going there? So we just have to be hyper-vigilant of all of these new technologies, whether that's in a dating app or in the healthcare or wherever else where we're going to encounter them more and more throughout all aspects of our lives.
Well, very good. Yeah, thank you. I think what I hear when you give your presentation, when I read your work, is a kind of prophetic warning in part that if the freight train keeps plowing forward with innovation, with assumptions about human consciousness that are often already baked deeply into the development of healthcare tools, including the IBM failure diagnostic tool, but all of our modern tools are built on a certain kind of logic, understandings about human consciousness baked into them, that we're going to continually find that the healthcare that we produce, maybe beyond even just being full of inequities on racial or gender lines, will continue to not meet human beings where they are, where they experience the world. You're building a kind of reverence for human consciousness that should always have us stand back from our tools and our practices and respect the fact that there's something happening here which will not be circumvented by an algorithm.
Fundamentally, because consciousness, being in love or being angry or being in pain or being sad or being lonely are not just functions, but they're states of being with all the ethical implications. If you're lonely, your body isn't performing some particular function, and so as a byproduct, you feel lonely. Lonely is a central fact. If you're lonely, it's a central fact of your existence, and we have to acknowledge that. And try to understand that. And a computer will never be lonely in that way at all.
Do you have any, thank you, I very much agree. Thank you. I would love to hear if you have any advice for people who are entering into arenas of healthcare or are working on innovative tools for healthcare technology. What could they have in mind as they build their tools so that the kind of vigilance that you're admonishing us to have with regard to human consciousness is at front of mind? Like what approach to tool making would allow us to protect ourselves from a future which is increasingly dehumanized?
Well, just emphasize your own conscious experience of the world. I mean, what Heidegger called Dasein, right? The fact that you have, you feel embedded with all your tools. It feels a particular way to be you. Yes, we don't know how we don't have a full scientific understanding of that, but that's the central aspects of your and every other reality. So we should never ever forget that subjectivity, the phenomenology, the conscious experience that underpins all of our lives day in, day out until the last conscious moment that we take.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Christof. Thanks, Eric, for the stimulating start to this day today. Good morning. My name is Amit Shukla. I'm honored to serve as the Dean of the College of Science and Engineering at Seattle University. I'm here with Provost Martin to present the Seattle University Excellence in Ethics Prize. With this award, we recognize an individual or group who represents the mission of Seattle University and contributes to ethics and technology in a leadership capacity while embodying our statement, where innovation meets humanity. We also thank Microsoft for their support in allowing us to develop this work and bringing together our fantastic panelists, many of which you'll hear from throughout the day, and who are all playing an important role as we adapt technology's promise to the needs of humanity. I'm pleased to announce that the 2024 Seattle University Ethics Prize is awarded to Dr. Christof Koch.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wow, that was a surprise. Woo! Thank you, Amit.
And as you heard earlier, Christof's work combines theoretical, computational, and experimental neuroscience with philosophy and contemporary trends, in particular artificial intelligence, and for these many, many impactful contributions, including integrated information theory of consciousness, Seattle University Ethics Prize is
Thank you.
to Dr. Koch.
I almost flunked out of my philosophy class in my Jesuit school. If only my Jesuit teacher could see me now. I don't know what to say. I'm speechless. Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. I'm deeply honored. I hope I can live up to this. It's interesting over the life cycle of a scientist as you transition sort of from being highly active in the lab and doing mathematics and being directly involved to looking, sort of considering more the long-term implications that typically you don't do when you're, 20, 25, when you're just an assistant professor. You just want to do and invent stuff and get patents and papers. But then later on, as the arc of your professional life sort of comes towards the later stages, you think more about the implications for society, for humans, or for the planet, for all conscious sentient beings. So thank you very much.
Thank you.